A man that I trust very much with his take on Australian politics, the economics of Australian politics, is Philip Coorey. He, of course, writes for the Australian Financial Review. I really like this bloke, and I'm sure he would love that I talk him up the way that I do. We'll have a chat to him a little bit later, but he's also been around for a long time. He's seen good governments come and go, and he's seen BS governments like this in place. That's my view, not his. And I am very excited to talk to him to see whether I am on the right track or the wrong track about the farce that is about to be put upon us in the next couple of weeks. The Economic Reform Roundtable. Now, of course, this was all supposed to be everything's on the table, but nothing to do with taxes will change, apparently. Nothing will happen when it comes to negative gearing. So what exactly is all of this going to be about? What is the real trick that they are about to pull off? We'll talk about that with Phil a little later in the show. Of course, this summit is a reheat of the snow job, which business signed up to, which essentially was a total victory for the union movement in terms of the industrial relations system when we had the Jobs Summit at the start of the first Albanese and Chalmers term, which of course was a reheat of the idea from Kevin Rudd. Remember with him on the Butcher's paper, sitting on the floor, all the ideas like Kate Blanchett and Reece Muldoon popping around to tell us how we should be running the country by 2020. Oh, those were the days. Well, it's just the same idea reheated for a third time. That said, there may be some fiddling on the edges, but when we know the size of the problem, it is just fiddling on the edges. Now, there may be an introduction of some sort of a road user charge on electric vehicles. Why? Because as slowly but surely, more electric vehicles slowly but surely start to take up a fair share of people on the roads, well, of course, they're not as light as a feather. They're quite heavy, which means they still chew up the roads. But because they're not using petrol, the usual taxation, which supposedly goes back to roads but doesn't, won't be happening. So potentially, even the Environment Minister is openly saying that there's no secret that there could end up being a special charge that would be placed on EVs, electric vehicles. But the real deal, the real idea, which is supposedly going to be the big economic idea out of this, but of course it will cost you, the taxpayer, billions more dollars, has to do with childcare. Now, I have said it before, and I stand by the idea that if you can solve childcare and if you can save small business policy, you're probably going to be in a majority for a significant period of time. The way you solve those two issues matters. Well, today in the fine print behind the stories that say that there is a plan for essentially turning the council-run and private-owned childcare centres into effectively another version of primary school, but one that'll have a co-payment in it, meaning that you will have to pay a little extra, say $10, $20 a day. Yes, brings down the overall cost and therefore theoretically frees up more people to be able to go to work, but the subsidy and the difference between the amount that childcare currently costs and the lowered payment will, of course, be made up by you and I, regardless of whether we have kids or not in the childcare system, the early learning system, as it should be known. Heavily unionised, and as we've shown you a million times before, woker than woke. This is the stuff that would even make a Green blush from time to time. Well, their source of news is the Turnbull Times, otherwise known as The Guardian. They had this exclusive tonight, which in my estimation is the big red light. This is what I think is going to be the biggest idea that's going to be coming out of this so-called economic roundtable and a reform table in a couple of weeks, where Labor has actually now asked an accounting firm to go off and design a universal childcare system. Now, those who know Anthony Albanese know that this has been his dream. As Gillard was the NDIS, as Hawke was Medicare, he wants universal childcare. Now, all of these are fine ideas, but of course, it all costs money. Where does it come from? Well, of course, who knows? If they're not going to put up taxes, then it's going to go on the credit card, and the credit card's already got $1 trillion on it. The government could redirect billions of dollars spending on the childcare subsidy and introduce a daily flat fee for families. It'll spend $10.4 million on the research. So much for these people saying they weren't going to bring in external consultants. No, it could all be done by the public service. No, $10 million for Deloitte. Required to access service demands, collect data across the early childhood education system with a report due before the next federal election. The analysis would examine childcare wages and property costs, as well as the experience of operators, lobby groups, families, according to the Federal Education Department guidance, which has been seen by the Turnbull Times. Now, again, I understand because I went through it. I went through it with our two kids about how expensive childcare is. I'm lucky, I've got a fantastic job, but there are plenty of people who have a real struggle when it comes to childcare. So the idea somewhere of being able to make it remarkably cheaper is going to be a popular idea. But the problem is, if you're not going to increase revenue from somewhere else, then all of it goes onto the overall pile of debt that we already have. And I know that most of us spend more than we earn. Most of us ring up credit cards. Most of us buy something, if it's a car or something like that, on a loan. Most of us have borrowed too much money to get the particularly nice house. All of it means you end up, of course, in a spiral of debt, which in many ways is why the previous generations that did not rack up such debts were so open to the idea that a federal government must balance its books. But as fewer of those people are voting at each and every election, the idea of just ringing up the credit card is now the way that the Australian government works. Now, don't pay attention to every detail here, but let me have a look here at the amount of money that comes into the federal government each and every year. You can see that basically half of it, the blue there, comes from personal income tax. The pink, that is company tax. The sliver of about $100 billion is the GST. So anyone saying, let's improve the GST, well, it's going to go nowhere near touching the sides of how much money the government takes off the average citizen, or even an increase in company tax on how much comes off the average citizen. But have a look at how they spend the money. The single largest area of spending in the federal government is welfare. Entitlement, as it's referred to now. This comes from everything from the dole to the age pension to the childcare subsidies. All the rest of it sits in and around this area of social security and welfare. You can see in terms of the next biggest area, the purple there is health, followed by the mid-blue there as defence. We're sort of working around the colour clock here. And then you start to see things like other functions and general services. So put simply, the majority of money that goes into the federal government each and every year comes from the individual worker. The biggest amount of money goes out the door via welfare. And this means when you have more spending than income, and that number getting bigger and bigger every single year, you get to what is called a structural deficit. That is when you have baked into the pie so much spending that you cannot keep up with it. So much so that, as I've shown you almost every night for the past little while, the next 40 years for Australia is deficit, 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 giant, 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 mega, 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 and my goodness, deficits for the next 40 years. Meaning it all goes on the credit card. So if the headline out of this is that we get ready for a big change when it comes to childcare, that will be paid for the same way they pay for everything else, the credit card. And the problem with this way of running a country is that while modern monetary theory means that nobody's going to ever call in the debt, you're never going to get the phone call from the bank in the United States, you're never going to get the call from the government of China or financial entities around the world, the reality is that paying off the debt goes from the 20th biggest thing that happens each and every year in your budget to the 15th, to the 10th, to now top 5 of all of the things they do in Victoria is pay off or pay the minimum payments on the credit card. If we keep doing these things the way we are doing it, the number one thing that we will end up spending our money on is paying off the debt in order to pay off all of the other promises. Now, it will be a brave person who stands in the way of universal childcare. But hopefully someone somewhere turns around and says, okay, cool, but how will you be paying for it not next year, but in 10 years' time? When the population balloons from the current 27 to 40 million people. When the number of people who need to access the childcare system goes from the current numbers and doubles or trebles. Who will be paying for it? How are you finding a way to do it? Because if you're not going to talk about what happens in 5 and 10 years' time, then of course, we're just going to be going into the black hole that they have been marching us into on things like the NDIS and other programs that all sound great on the day they are announced. And to oppose them or to say, how are you going to pay for it? You are made out to be the hardest-hearted of people. But believe me, the worst possible gift that we can hand to the future generations of this country is the money that comes from them via taxation goes basically to pay off the credit card to then rack up more money on the credit card. That circle of debt is deadly for a country, one that hopefully someone, somewhere, will turn around and notice is not the way for us to run a country.